our session for today. We're going to be catching up a little bit. We were supposed to go through numbers 1 to 18 last time, since I just divided it up when I first did this between 1 to 18 and 19 to 36. But chapters 10 to 21 kind of all fit together in something called the murmuring traditions. Grumbling, griping, complaining, finding fault. The strange thing about what goes on in these books is we really don't find a happy bunch of people. Just don't find a happy bunch of people. At least that's not what's reported and recorded. What's recorded is they're always finding something wrong. And so here, in what we look at today with the murmurings in the wilderness, in fact, it starts already in chapter 10 with verse 35 with the shout of Moses of, "Arise, O Lord, let your enemies be scattered." Do you remember where we had other complaints and murmuring? It's one of the puzzles because some of these things happen more than once in different places. Yes, sir?
Right at the Red Sea before it's parting?
Right at the Red Sea after it parted. After they went out into the wilderness. So I think chapter 16 already in Exodus is the one where they begin to complain about what? What do you remember they complained about? Food.
And water.
And water. Wow, is that a surprise? So the idea is, here we've been led out into this wilderness and now we're going to die. And let me tell you, the Sinai Peninsula, north and south, is pretty much barren. It is sand and stone, and that's about it. Kathy and I, back in 1984, we flew into Cairo and then took a trip up from Cairo up into Jerusalem. So we were around in northern Egypt for a little bit, and we didn't go down to the Sinai that time. We went down to the Sinai in 2000. But one thing that I was interested in, because I had been teaching about this business, about the Israelites going through the wilderness up into the land of promise, I just wanted to see what it looked like. And even kind of the direct route that we took by bus, which was in, I think, 1980 maybe, the Israelis and Egyptians made a peace treaty. And the Israelis gave some of the Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt. And you could still see a lot of the wreckage from a lot of the tanks along the side of the road. There were actually a lot of little indentations where if you get a little bit of rain, then there'll be a few trees here and there. I thought there'd be only a couple of them, but there were actually quite a few. But mostly it's just dry as dust. And so if somebody were coming from a distance and they were thirsty, all they have to do is look for a tree in the distance, because the tree is going to be by a water source. And then they'll know there must be some water there, or there was. And by the time we saw it, it was in April, and already some of those were drying out. An oasis would be where you've got a more permanent source of water that is coming up from under the ground, and there are very few of those. That's what Moses would have gone to at Kadesh Barnea, where he stayed with his father-in-law, Ruler, Hobab, or Jethro. All different names are used for the family there. And so what you have now is they've been brought out. Have they seen any miracles yet? Parting of the sea, that was miracle 1. Miracle 2,
Passover.
the unparting of the sea. Actually, the Passover would have been 0.
Yeah.
That should come first. That the firstborn of all the people of Egypt died. But so it was one miracle they got through. Another miracle, the rest of the boys in the band from Pharaoh and his host didn't. So God has delivered them. He has given them deliverance from the troubles that they were in Egypt. And now right away, already back in Exodus, they complain and say, we sure miss all the good food we had back there. I remember hearing a phrase once, present pests are worse than past plagues. So maybe you went through typhoid fever going all the way through your entire community, and now you got 3 flies floating around in the kitchen and they irritate you. But the deeper issue that I find really, I think probably all the way through the Bible, is the, quote, mistrust of an idea that God really is watching over us and caring for us. We can all say it. You know, it's everything. Well, I believe in the Father and the Son and Holy Spirit and all the rest of what goes with that. And we can come and worship and hear the good news. And yet there is that nagging thing of, I'm on my own. And what am I going to do to take care of myself? You can read the Bible every day for the rest of your life, and you're still going to have those doubts and fears. Our old nature is there as well. And so it's not as much to find fault with them and say, boy, they were a bunch of bad people, but to realize this is also in the human heart. But there isn't, I don't know if this is the right way to say it, there isn't much happiness in the Bible. You know, so you have God saying, I am with you always, and I think that is a theme that's going to run all the way through. And so I don't know if it's sort of like the evening news. They didn't talk about the hundreds of thousands of people who made their kids supper and read them a story and put them to bed. They talk about the 3, you know, kids who were found outside in the cold at 20 degrees below zero, and the mother was in a bar. And so it may be that same kind of thing here. There really isn't much to find out about these, and so it kind of highlights that the people's heart was not necessarily one with God and they were turning away. I have told, probably you guys as well, at one time when I was finishing my studies of my doctoral thesis, which is now, I finished the thesis, I don't know if I told you this, Kathy, 40 years ago this month. A lifetime ago. Dan's lifetime ago, because I sent it off 2 weeks before Dan was born. When I was preparing for my oral exams in early 1980, then I read parts of the Bible on the tape so I could listen to them again and again. So I did my own reading. And the Bible itself, the Revised Standard Version that I used, is about 60 hours. So it would be kind of a long day, but in 6 10-hour days, we could hear the whole Bible. It really isn't much, is it? For a history from the beginning of time until now. One fellow, Don Fisher, said maybe it can take you 60 hours. It would take me a lot longer than that. But anyway, what I would do is, by and large, when I was going to see people in the hospital from my country, location, whatever, then I would just plug the tapes in. And when I would do communions, a lot of times I'd just listen to the Psalms over and over and over again and just keep on hearing them. I found it to be a good way to listen slowly instead of to speed read, because we have a kind of an idea that we can speed read. But it has kind of been dawning on me more all the time that there is a lot more about God is dealing with people in a broken world. And so Luther would talk about that we bear our crosses, and would see that even the daily troubles of life that we have are our crosses to bear. I'm not quite so sure about that one, but it certainly is apparent that life does not go smoothly for everybody. And you know, you're the best hitter in the world if you hit 2 out of 5, or just about. Ty Cobb, 420 average. Most people are doing 310, 320, 330. They're doing a pretty good job. 2 out of 3 times they're going and sitting down. And they're the good ones. And so there are a lot of different kinds of disappointments. But what we have now is, and we're going to set the stage up for it, of the different kinds of problems that they have. The biggie that we're going to look at today is when they sent the spies up into the land. About how long are we right now in Numbers 10 from having been delivered from Egypt? Time-wise, calendar-wise.
Months.
They left Egypt in one springtime. One of the things we're going to see here, not too far, I think it's in this section, is they had their first celebration of or anniversary of the Passover, and then there were some people who had buried somebody, and so then they were unclean, and so a month later they can have their Passover celebration, and pretty much after that, that's when they're ready to go. So we are not more than, not a year and a half from when they left the land of Egypt. How long should it have taken them to get into the promised land then? Weeks. They just move on up and go in. We're going to find out that they send spies, and these spies will, and I'll come to it in just a minute, the spies will say, it's a beautiful land, but there's big, thick, walled cities, big, tall guys. How in the world can we go in there and do it? And really the answer that comes all the way through the Bible is, as long as you're looking in a mirror to try to figure out the answer, you're in trouble. As long as you say, where will I get the strength to do this, you are in trouble. It is when you say that God says, I will be with you. Now, trouble is, nobody quite knows when that is and how that works. So if I say, well, I'm going to make a $5 million investment in a new building, and I'm hoping that this will help me to get on my feet financially. I've got to borrow $499,000 or $4,999,000. I got $1,000 that I can put in, and then I have to borrow the rest. But I'm sure that I can do it, and I'm sure God says I will be with you always, so I can trust him. Maybe not. You may still make some very foolish decision and go broke. So we can't necessarily say the things of our eternal life, we can say. God promises to be with us during this life and to take us to be with him. But here are people on their way to their equivalent of heaven, the land of Canaan, and they're pretty much scared along the way and wondering what's going on. So a couple of the spies say a good message. What are their names? Huh?
You heard it over there.
Where?
I said Caleb.
And?
Joshua.
Joshua. So Caleb and Joshua are the two who bring back a good report. The other 10 say, well, it's a great land, but not so sure that we ought to go up there. That cost them 38 years, and that whole generation to die out in the wilderness. Dale, I don't know if you remember this, but one of the little flyers, we used to get these, the flyers in Sunday school, it was 4 pages, so you got a nice little picture on the front, something in here, and then usually a little prayer, something on the back. Do you ever remember the picture of the 2 spies bringing the grapes? That picture is the one that sits in my mind most. They got this one cluster of grapes dragging along the bottom of the ground with this big, long, thick pole about showing how beautiful and how productive the land was. And yet they say, we don't think we can make it. And so when they do that, and so in a matter of faith, when you turn in on yourself and you say, how am I going to do it? Already you're in trouble. That's why if you just think about it on your own, you'd never be a pastor. I've often wondered.
I agree.
Why in the world would anybody go and doing that? Just because of the challenge that comes up with it along the way of the things that I remember a lot of young people would say, well, I want to be a pastor, I want to help people. The first thing you find out is they don't want help. By and large. By the time you find out something's going on, it's way long since past anybody being able to help you along the way. You're the last one to know. So anyway, chapter 11. The people complain, and the fire of God comes. This is why it's so exciting to be in the presence of God, because the fire comes out. Now when the people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes, the Lord heard it, and his anger was kindled. Then the fire of the Lord burned against them and consumed some of the outlying parts of the camp. But the people cried out to Moses, and Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire abated. So that place was called Taberah, because the fire of the Lord burned against it. And my little note says the meaning of Taberah is uncertain, which is a good thing because I was trying to rack my brain to say, what in the world does that word mean? So nobody knows. So a lot of these words, there are about 1,000 words out of the 6,000 in the Hebrew Bible that only occur once. And then there's a whole bunch more that only occur up to 5 times. And so some of them have connected words, some of them they look at other languages and try and figure out what the word might mean. Yep.
Do you think God's trying to demonstrate how important an advocate is? Is that his point in letting loose until someone advocates on their behalf? Or is that something we can't know? Stick around in the box.
No.
Okay.
I don't think how important an advocate is because that would put too much importance to the advocate.
Okay.
Then that would make me in charge and God under my thumb. If I can just push him hard enough, he better do what I say. But it does say that there is a sense in which God's wrath does not go on forever. But I think it would be trying to guess too much to think that this is about Moses. This is about, you say, I don't take care of you. Watch what happens when I pull back. The same thing like the story of Ezekiel. God says, well, you don't think I'm here in Jerusalem? I'm going to pull out of the temple and take a hike down to the Dead Sea. Now watch what happens, and the city gets destroyed. So it's the absence of God that is the real problem. And that's when all the stuff that he's been holding back now comes in to get them. But having said that, this is a scary God. And we ought not act as if God is, what's the word? How did Randy Sharon say it that C.S. Lewis put it? God is gentle, but he is not tame. We tend to think we can put God under our thumb. I'll tell him what to do and he better do it. And for many people, that teleological idea about using the 10 Commandments or all of this stuff, I'll do what he told me and then he better bless me. God is above any control over anything. That's what it means to be God. He is above any pressure or control, and yet he does listen to his creatures. And so I remember one time, this is Norm Utek. I was talking to Norm Utek when Paul W. Meyer had a call from Concordia, Ann Arbor, out to Concordia in California. And I was serious when I said, I told God to let him stay here. He's a really good prof here. He says, I'm asking the Lord to have his will done. You know, and sometimes those little conversations just teach you more than anything you learned anywhere else. So we lay before the Lord what's on our heart, basically so we're not weighed down. And he's going to do what he's going to do. And so we often think, well, I know enough about the church and about everything. I'm going to tell God what to do because he promised. So it says, well, pastors and teachers are to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ. And I'm here to tell you, a lot of saints don't want to be built up. Just leave me alone. I had a young couple in my first congregation who transferred to a different church where they wouldn't be so obvious. They said, we just don't want to stick out. And here we stick out. We know you want us to do something here. We're going to go hide in the big congregation where maybe they won't pick on us. I don't know if they picked on them there or not. But they were right. You know, everybody's got gifts. How many volunteers do you have in your congregation? How many volunteers? All of them?
About 10%.
Huh?
About 10%.
10%? The church doesn't have any volunteers. The church has members who each get to use their own gift, their own way. There are no volunteers. Okay? Everybody's a member. And the church's task is to stir up the gifts of the people to be able to use it within the congregation and outside of it for the kinds of things that the Lord would have us do. So no volunteers. Now, sometimes we just look at it wrong. And so, if we get 10% of the people to do this, we're doing great. Everybody has a gift, and unless somebody has denied the faith, everybody is spiritually alive. But we might say, here's the 3 ways in which you can use that gift, and other than that, we don't care. And there may be many other ways that people could use those gifts. So everybody here is part of the people of God, and they complain. Now, the fearsome thing, and a text like this just kind of cries out for silence. It's not the time to be able to say, oh my goodness, I grumbled last week, and that's why I broke my arm. Or that's why I hit that chuck hole. And what happens, and this is, I can't prove anything here. I can't quote, get God off the hook. But we know that the word about him is that he came to suffer and die and give us life everlasting, and he does not see us as his enemies. While we were enemies, Christ died for us, but that's unbelievers. And so, in essence, it almost sounds like some of these people had quit being believers altogether and left the whole deal. And so Moses then pleads with the Lord, and it says the fire was abated, and the fire of the Lord that had burned against them. But don't play with God as if he's a toy. You shall not take the power of the Lord your God for your own purposes. So I don't have a good answer for anything more than that. I really don't. But just to stand here, sometimes in awe, and say, let's not try to tame God and make him just take care of our own little private concerns that we have. We pour them before him. And the other part of it is we could then say we're not going to pour anything before him because we're afraid of him. In fact, this will get at your situation in your church a little bit, Fred. Why did people begin to honor Mary? Because Jesus was the guy with the sword coming out of his mouth in the book of Revelation, 40 steps up, waiting to cut 2 ways and destroy people. Mary had, at the wedding of Cana that we were just talking about before, she had said to her son, they have no wine, and he listened to her. And so pray to Mary, she can talk to her kid in a way that you can't. And much of the prayers to Mary have been in the light of being afraid of Jesus. And when you see in the book of Revelation the thing about that, or you see a passage like this, that's why you have to read the whole book and realize there are times when people will turn away, and we shouldn't deny that that's there. I don't know if this is correct, but Don Abden said too often we're trying to talk to people as Christians when they're not anymore. They quit being Christians long ago, and we're still trying to talk to them as if they are Christians. Now that just means you tell them the story over again and let the Holy Spirit work, but don't necessarily assume because they were confirmed 40 years ago that they know the whole deal. Dale, question?
Moses seemed to be very good at talking to God about his reputation being tarnished if he didn't do certain things.
Sometimes that's all that's left. I like this in the I like this in the Psalms when it says, God, you know, we really messed up, but you wouldn't want people to think badly about you, would you? So, Dad, I know you've bailed me out of jail 13 times now, but you wouldn't want people to think that you're not a loving guy, would you? And Dad says, rot. Which, in the deepest sense of the word, is what he says to his son on Good Friday, die, instead of everybody else. That's really the brunt of what happens on Good Friday. So I run all of these things about the wrath of God against fallen humanity through the cross. I finally say, he says, it is finished. It is finished. So there may be problems that we have, but we ought not think that God is trying to torch us. We are not the unbelievers who have turned away from him. So don't think that your little griping or complaining, or big griping or complaining, is going to be enough for God to say, I've had enough of you. Because that's already been punished on Good Friday. Thank goodness. So anyway, The rabble among them had a strong craving. What's the rabble? Now there's a nice word to make you feel good about everything. The rabble among them had a craving. Where's the rabble from? It says in Exodus that there were a bunch of other people who came and joined the crowd. It wasn't just the descendants of Jacob, but others said, hey, they're going, let's hop the same train. So they went along. And it may be them, it may be just some of the people, just the hoi polloi, the commoners, the everyday people, they started complaining and craving. If we only had meat to eat, we remember the fish we used to eat in Egypt for nothing. Where would they get the fish from?
The Nile.
The Nile. And all sorts of fish there, and the fish that we used to eat. And the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, the garlic. Must have been they had no rabbits. Wreck in their garden. So anyway, our strength is dried up, and there's nothing at all but this manna to look at. So they had the manna, which supposedly tasted really sweet, but they said, well, that's not enough. Now the manna was like coriander seed, and its color was like the color of gum resin. So we're getting some of these same stories over again that we had in chapter 17. We got it back there. Now we're getting some more of this only a year later. As if there's a whole retelling of the whole kind of thing now from the entrance into what we're going to get here. The people went around, gathered it, ground it in mills or beat it as mortars, then boiled it in pots and made cakes of it. And the taste of it was like the taste of cakes baked with oil, like a pancake. Okay, so it tastes like pancakes. And it sounds like the syrup was already on it, built-in syrup. When the dew fell on the camp, it was night. In the night, the manna would fall with it. Now Moses heard the people weeping throughout their families, all at the entrances of their tents. So we kind of have a family organizational structure here. Okay, this is the basic framework that we have. Just lots of families who are each involved in this. And then the Lord became very angry, and Moses was displeased. So Moses said to the Lord, why have you treated your servant so badly? Why have I not found favor in your sight, that you lay the burden of all this people on me? Did I conceive all this people? Did I give birth to them, that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom, as a nurse carries a sucking child to the land that you promised on oath to their ancestors? Where am I to get meat to give to all this people? For they come weeping to me and say, give us meat to eat. I am not able to carry all this people alone, for they're too heavy for me. If this is the way you are going to treat me, put me to death at once, if I have found favor in your sight, and do not let me see my misery. And do not let me see my misery. Whoa!
He's uptight.
He's uptight. He's uptight. You know what that's called in the Bible? Huh? What's the technical term for that?
Lament.
A lament. That's a lament. Where do laments come in? What's the most famous one? My God, why have you forsaken me? Well, guess what? Moses could have written that one.
Yeah.
Because he's, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me from the words of my groaning? I'm tired of carrying all this crowd. And God immediately zapped him with lightning, and he was toast in 3 seconds. Ground opened up, swallowed him up, and a guy named Fred let him out from there. So, God listened to him. But this is the origin of lament. It's God has done good things. We expect him to continue to do good things. Now the good things aren't happening, so it must be God's fault. The woman you gave me caused me to eat. These people here, they're my problem. If I didn't have all these people, they wouldn't be such a problem for me. So the Lord said to Moses, gather for me 70 of the elders of Israel, whom you know to be the elders of the people and officers over them. And this is probably connected with that thing of over the tens and hundreds, or 50s and hundreds and thousands. So you got a little bit of officer, if that's the correct term for it, sounds like a little bit of a fighting structure as well. People who are in charge of various parts of the fighting order. But he says, bring them to the tent of meeting and have them take their place there with you. I will come down and talk with you there, and I will take some of the spirit that is on you and put it on them, and they shall, bear the burden of the people along with you, so that you will not bear it all by yourself. And say to the people, consecrate yourselves for tomorrow, and you shall eat meat, for you have wailed in the hearing of the Lord, saying, if only we had meat to eat. Surely it was better for us in Egypt. Therefore the Lord will give you meat, and you shall eat. You shall eat not only 1 day, or 2 days, or 5 days, or 10 days, or 20 days, but a whole month, until it comes out of your nostrils and becomes loathsome to you, because you have rejected the Lord who is among you, and have wailed before him, saying, why did we ever leave Egypt? But Moses said, the people I am with number 600,000 on foot, and you say, I will give them meat that they may eat for a whole month. Are there enough flocks and herds to slaughter for them? Are there enough fish in the sea to catch for them? And of course, they're not by the sea. The Lord said to Moses, is the Lord's power limited? Now you shall see whether my word will come true for you or not. So Moses went out and told the people the words of the Lord. And he gathered 70 elders of the people and placed them all around the tent. Then the Lord came down in a cloud. Notice, what do you call this when God comes down to appear? What's the technical term for that?
Theophany?
A theophany. And clouds usually come along with it. So it's sort of like the cloud comes down, and then he's talking to them in the midst of the cloud. And placed them all around the tent. Then the Lord came down in a cloud and spoke to him, and took some of the spirit that was on him and put it on the 70 elders. And when the spirit rested upon them, they prophesied, but they did not do so again. 2 men remained in the camp, one named Eldad, the other named Medad, and the spirit rested on them. They were among those registered, but they had not gone out to the tent, and so they prophesied in the camp. And a young man ran and told Moses, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. And Joshua the son of Nun, the assistant of Moses, one of his chosen men, said, my lord Moses, stop them. Who does that sound like?
Peter.
No. James and John. Do you remember what James and John's nickname was? Boanerges, sons of thunder. There are some people who didn't want to talk to Jesus in Samaria. They said, God, should we call a little fire down? Or old Mr. Elijah, the pyromaniac, he's always calling fire down on somebody. He's torching a sacrifice. He torches 2 groups of 50 guys. The third guy comes, oh, please don't torch me. Please just come and listen. Fire is not a very nice thing in the Bible. It's pretty dangerous stuff. But anyway, Joshua son of Nun said, stop them. But Moses said to him, are you jealous for my sake? Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, and that the Lord would put his spirit on them. And Moses and the elders of Israel returned to camp. Then a wind went out from the Lord, and it brought quails from the sea, and let them fall beside the camp. God says, we'll just use another little wind. God's windy as well as fiery. It blows a little wind in, and it's spring of the year. So what's happening? The annual migration. A whole bunch of birds are flying north. They fly through that area because it's a little more dangerous to fly all the way right across the Mediterranean. And so they fly where there's land underneath them. And but this is a miracle. About a day's journey on this side and a day's journey on the other side, all around the camp, about 2 cubits deep on the ground. What's a cubit?
Tip of the finger to the elbow.
Tip of the finger to the elbow. So about 3 foot high. They're crawling around there, flying around. So the people worked all that day and the night and all the next day gathering the quails. The least anyone gathered was 10 homers. And a homer, chamor is the word for a donkey. So 10 homers means 10 donkey loads, was the least anybody got. And they spread them out for themselves all around the camp. But while the meat was still between their teeth, before it was consumed, the anger of the Lord was kindled against the people. The Lord struck the people with a very great plague. So that place was called Kibroth HaTa'avah, because there they buried the people who had the craving. From Kibroth HaTa'ava, the people journeyed to Hazeroth. So now they're going to move on from there. But they get enough that they have too much. And what was God saying? If I want to give you meat, I'll give you meat.
Till it comes out of your nostrils.
Till it comes out of your nostrils. Well, I mean, it's going to stink to high heavens by the time it all rots, you know, that they've slaughtered all that. But God says, if I planned to make you rich, I'd have made you rich. If I'd have planned to make you an astronaut, I'd have made you an astronaut. Be happy with what you've got. Be happy with where you are. Be happy with what I've provided for you. Yeah, but I want more. I want more. This may be a crazy thing to say, but have you ever had a perfectly happy day?
No.
I've never had a perfectly happy day. There's always something. There's always something. You know, we can get close some days, and it could be beautiful days, but there's always something. Always something that just kind of interrupts it and makes one feel sad about this or that. And so, in essence, if I spend all my time saying to God, I want more, or I deserve more, then I'm going to experience the frustration, the wrath, whatever we want to say from God. That doesn't mean he's going to zap me and kill me. But he's certainly going to make me unhappy enough to be unhappy about my unhappiness. And then say, what are you complaining about? Why do you want more? And so very, very complicated text here, but also one that really shows the depth of the human heart. And God says, I could do more if I want to. I could make it all different. And in eternity, he will. But then we're going to have enough. That's why the give us this day our daily bread. It says, give me enough for today. In eternity, we'll have enough for today, and we won't worry about tomorrow or yesterday. And that's, I think, what the big promise is I don't, right now, the past drags us down, and the future still scares us. And we don't know how it's going to turn out. But he says that there'll be a day when everything will be just what I intended it to be originally. But this certainly shows us that there is an aspect of the way God deals with people that are not at peace with him. If nothing else, they will be upset inside. So there may be all sorts of ways in which we feel that, but sometimes it's our problem and not God's. So chapter 12. I'm not going to take all of these in as much detail, but chapter 12, Miriam and Aaron complain about Moses. Now notice Miriam is mentioned first. And so the commentaries say, well, Miriam was really the instigator of this, not Aaron. And that's why Miriam has some trouble and not Aaron. Well, this is even from a commentary 150 years ago when you didn't have to worry so much about women's rights and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm not sure they'd write it quite the same way in the commentaries anymore.
Aaron's already demonstrated he doesn't have much of a backbone.
Yeah, he's a follower, not a leader. He, back in the 80s when Reagan was president, they used to talk about the Teflon president, that no matter what he did, Iran-Contra affair and whatever, he was always able to get out of it and escape and win re-election, all that. I think Aaron was the Teflon high priest. Somehow just nothing stuck to him. And so here Miriam and Aaron, and they complain about his Cushite wife. What's Cushite mean?
Different tribe.
Huh?
Different tribe.
Okay, where is Cush?
It's an Ethiopian woman.
Ethiopia. Okay, Cush is Ethiopia. All right, so south farther of Egypt. This doesn't seem to be the wife that we find referred to elsewhere. And so I think her name is Jochebed.
Which is also Zipporah, is that right?
Zipporah, yeah, I'm sorry.
That's his mom is Jochebed.
Huh?
Is Jochebed his mom?
Yes, Jochebed is his mother, yes. And so here we've got them complaining about this. Now, was she from African descent? Was she, whatever it was, they didn't like her having somebody else as a wife besides whoever they thought important. Now, is Miriam older than Moses?
Yes.
Otherwise, she couldn't have watched him in the little
Right.
ark. Is Aaron older than Moses?
No.
3 years older.
Oh, is it?
Aaron is 3 years older, so Moses is the baby in the family. Okay, and sibling rivalry, the kids are picking on their little brother, no matter how old he is, no matter how important he looks to everybody else. So the three of them stand before God, and God says, well, let's take care of this thing here now. Hear my words. When there are prophets among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to them in visions. I speak to them in dreams. Not so with my servant Moses. He's entrusted with all my house. Who was entrusted with all of whose house? Joseph, first of all, with Potiphar, and then Joseph in prison, and then Joseph before Pharaoh. So this is a very important person who is entrusted with everything. You only get one of them. It's not like you have 100 favorite friends. You can only have one of them. And so God says, I trust him here. And so with him I speak face to face clearly, not in riddles, and he beholds the form of the Lord. Now you get in all this fight about did Moses actually see God or just see him from behind or everything like that. There are all sorts of squabbles about what he saw and what he didn't see. Did he see his clothes and only part of his raiment or whatever? Or did he only see his back? Because God says no one can come into my presence and live. Isaiah worries about that in chapter 6. He says, ooh, I saw God in the temple in the Holy of Holies. I'm a dead man. He said, no, you're not a dead man. But anyway, why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? You think that's just your kid brother? He's important in my sight, even if you don't notice that he is. So when the cloud went away, God comes down the cloud again. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. Then Miriam has leprosy. How long does she keep leprosy? 7 days. So she has leprosy for a week. He says something about even if she had even if her father had spit in her face, she'd be ashamed for a while. So she has the leprosy 7 days, and then she's cured. And then the people go on from Hazeroth to the wilderness of Paran. And as I mentioned, nothing bad happens to Aaron in the crowd here. So now we get to the biggie. The spies go to the land of Canaan, and I've looked at part of this story already. So they get one per tribe. Doesn't have to be the leader of it. It's just one of them is appointed from each one of them. And of the spies, Caleb of Judah and Joshua, he's also known as Hoshea of the tribe of Ephraim, are the only two who bring back this good report now, and a positive report. When this all plays out, and they have brought all of the wonderful things back, then God says, this whole generation is going to die out in the wilderness. So it's a slow form of the fire creeping in around the edge of the camp. You're all going to die here. And what do they do as a result of that?
We changed our minds.
Huh?
We changed our minds.
We changed our minds, and God says, oh, no, you don't. Yep, you've got problems here. So, but anyway, chapter 13 talks about the fact that they brought back a good report but didn't want to go. First of all, they say, let's go back to the land of Egypt. And it's Moses and Aaron and Joshua and Caleb before all the people. And then the glory of the Lord appears. So we really have a kind of just an ongoing fight that happens between the leadership. So Miriam and Aaron are not happy with Moses. The people are not happy with Moses. And in many ways, this is simply another level of God's not happy, or we're not happy with God. The sin, over and over and over again. Cain didn't like it when God didn't accept his sacrifice. He was not happy with God. So many of these different situations, they're not happy with somebody and think they can do something about it. Jacob's brothers, or Joseph's brothers, sold him down to Egypt. Jacob didn't like the fact that Esau would inherit, and he and his mom cooked up the scheme. And with every one of these, there's trouble as a result. When David takes Bathsheba, there is trouble in his family all through the rest of the time that they rule. And so the consequences of sin come on people. It's not like you do something and tomorrow everything you can start over again. There are consequences that we all have along the way here. So chapter 13, then they went and they spied out the land, when they came all the way through it and they had seen the Nephilim and the Anakim, the big tall guys, then they got very scared. This sounds like almost like what you see in Genesis chapter 6, where there were giants in the land. And I imagine if you were 5'2" and you saw someone 6'4", that would be enough to do you in. I mean, it's from this group of people that Goliath will come many generations later. Chapter 14, then the people all cry and weep and no, we wish we had died out here in the wilderness. And then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly. And Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, who were among those who spied on the land, tore their clothes and said to all the congregation, the land that we went through as spies is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will bring us to the land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey and all the rest of that stuff. But the whole congregation threatened to stone them. Then, I'm in verse 10 of chapter 14. Then the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the Israelites, and the Lord said to Moses, how long will this people despise me? Notice what happened. God was complaining, or Moses was complaining to God. Now God's complaining to Moses. Now God utters a lament. How long have I put up with this? Which is kind of like what happened with the flood. God finds I have enough of this. God says, I don't have that in my quiver anymore. I already used that up once, and I've sent fire down on Sodom and Gomorrah. What am I going to do with this crowd? Let's see, I lost my place. 14:12. I will strike them with pestilence and disinherit them, and I will make of you a nation greater and mightier than they. But Moses said to the Lord, then the Egyptians will hear it, this is what they always talk about, for in your might you brought up this people from among them, and they will tell the inhabitants of this land, they've heard that you, O Lord, are in the midst of this people, for you, O Lord, are seen face to face, and your cloud stands over them, and you go in front of them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Now if you kill this people all at one time, then the nations who have heard about you will say, it's because the Lord was not able to bring this people into the land he swore to give them, that he slaughtered them out in the wilderness. And now therefore let the power of the Lord be great in the way you promised when you spoke, saying, the Lord is slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, forgiving iniquity and transgression, but by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the parents upon the children to the third and fourth generation. Forgive the iniquity of this people according to the greatness of your steadfast love, just as you have pardoned this people from Egypt even until now. Now notice, Moses does this. Now it says at the beginning of the chapter, Moses and Aaron were there, but now Moses is much more the guy pleading than Aaron. I would have expected it to have been Aaron who would have been offering this prayer, because later he's talked about as the high priest who's the go-between. Then the Lord said, I do forgive, just as you have asked. Now, again, you have to watch out that you don't say he forgave only because he asked it. Okay? So, okay, I made that promise. I am slow to anger. Okay, I will relent right now. So it says the prayer of a righteous man avails much. So we pray and beg God to do this, but we are not as lucky as Moses to get all the answers to it. Again, we're in very hard territory for us. Okay, it's very hard territory. So because we have to ask the question: is it only because somebody asks that they get forgiven? Huh?
This guy. Because he's advocating for us, we know we're
Okay, so he's the advocate. So God's advocating within himself.
Amen.
All right, well, that works up for me. Is he powerful enough?
Amen.
Oh, good. Thank goodness. Glad he came. If he hadn't come, we'd be in real trouble, wouldn't we? We'd all be learning Hebrew. So he says, you've tested me, But my servant Caleb, he has a different spirit. Since the Amalekites and the Canaanites live in the valleys, turn tomorrow and head for the wilderness by the way to the Red Sea. So then you get another one. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, how long shall this wicked congregation complain against me? It's almost like he's saying it all over again. Wait a minute, he just said it. As I live, I will do the very things I heard you say. Your dead bodies shall fall in this very wilderness, and all of your number, including the census, from 20 years old and upward. So all of the adults who have been in on this thing and said, let's stone Moses, as if Moses was a blasphemer. That's why you stone somebody. They are all going to die out in the wilderness. How long is that going to take?
40 years.
Yeah, 38 years from this point. So 38 years, and all of them will die. That excludes, from what I can understand, the family of Aaron, because Eleazar, one of Aaron's sons, goes into the promised land as well. And I didn't ever notice that, but Kennedy G caught that in class way back when. He said, what about him? But of the tribes then, not the tribe, the Levites weren't going to get any land anyway. Yeah, Dale?
How did they keep track of how old they were?
I don't know, maybe they had notches on their belt or something. I don't know.
Is it?
I mean, you'd know how long the years are.
There's no paperwork and
Most cultures have it in their head. How do you know how long a year is?
The other thing, yes.
How do you know how long a year is?
12 months.
No, it's not really 12 moons. It's how many moons plus 10 days?
that's not going to work.
That's not going to work. They figured out how long a year lasted in Egypt, I think. The day when there was no shadow cast by a stick, and the sun was directly overhead.
Yeah.
Then they waited for the next time you saw the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay, that's how long a year is. So they even figured out that it was 365.25 days. They knew that. They didn't always follow it, and various times in history they've had to change it because of that little bit of extra. There are, I don't remember what year it is. Do you know this, any of you? The year when they skipped 10 days?
I'm thinking 1511,
Was it 1511?
but I'm not sure.
I was thinking it was somewhere around the time of George Washington is when they did it. So I'll have to try and track that one down. But they skipped 10 days at some point just to say we got to get back on track again. So you're going to find that for me now.
Oh, no, he's interested.
When did they skip 10 days?
That mean they stuck on a Thursday for 10 days?
No, that meant today is the 10th, tomorrow's the 21st.
Oh, they just went like that instead?
Yeah,
Okay.
and tomorrow's the 21st.
Okay.
It was something I'm remembering about that George Washington, who was born on the 22nd of February, there was a different original date that they changed or something like that. But I'm kind of floating around with that one. So
1752.
1752.
Yep.
So it's during Washington's lifetime. Okay, 1752. You had the 15, right? Just the numbers were switched. So
Something also happened in 1582 as well.
1582. Oh,
Yeah,
is
so
that the
there's-
date you used?
Yep, so
1511.
there's two different,
So two different times they
yeah.
then they finally figured it out, huh? By the way, this is something none of us will have to worry about. But which years are not going to be leap years in the next 400 years? You know what, Dale?
You only count the odd numbers for leap years and the evens you don't. So that means every 3 will be leap year, the fourth one won't.
For what, in the next 400 years?
So you have,
You won't have a leap, we had a leap year in 2000. We will not have one in 2100, 2200, or 2300, I think.
yeah, is that how it goes? I thought it was the reverse.
I think there's
You have to
three.
have 3 of them, and then the fourth one is not a leap year.
No, it's 3 that they skip. So remember that when you get to 2100, that it shouldn't be a leap year in February, all right? These are the kind of things where somebody else is going to have to remember that for us, I guess. It's in the book.
Is there
So-
anything that where the Israelites realize they've been sentenced to this 40 years of?
Yeah, right here. Yeah, right here. Let's see where it is.
34.
Verse 30, well,
32.
40 days for every year you spite it out. In verse 39, when Moses told these words to all the Israelites, the people mourned greatly. They rose up early and went to the heights of the hill country, saying, "We are here. We'll go to the place the Lord has promised, for we have sinned." But Moses said, "Why do you continue to transgress the command of the Lord? That will not succeed. Do not go up, for the Lord's not with you. Do not let yourselves be struck down before the enemies. For the Amalekites and the Canaanites will confront you there, and you shall fall by the sword, because you've turned back from following the Lord. The Lord will not be with you." But they presumed to go up to the heights of the hill country, even though the ark of the covenant of the Lord and Moses had not left the camp, which tells us that sometimes they took the ark with them, as if God was their secret weapon. Then the Amalekites and the Canaanites who lived in the hill country came down and defeated them, pursuing them as far as Hormah. You ever been to Hormah, Kathy?
No problem.
That's Tel Masos.
Oh, yeah, okay.
She and I dug in Hormah, if that's the actual place, which actually is from the word cherem in Hebrew, which means to destroy completely. But we didn't find the destruction layer with what we were digging.
We found the road.
Yeah, you got a Roman toga pin. Yeah, I got a part of a beer jug. That's all I found. So anyway, so they did try, and then they failed. It is right at 2 o'clock. Let's take a little break, and then we'll go quicker with the rest of the murmuring and complaining. Okay, so as we look into the rest of these stories a little bit, chapter 15, oddly enough, all of a sudden, in the midst of this, we have some instructions about another kind of sacrifice. About offerings in the land, including drink offerings. Why wouldn't you have any drink offerings mentioned before this time? And why is it strange to have them now?
Didn't have anything to drink.
Well, they had water.
Yeah,
But what does a drink offering assume? Vineyards.
yeah.
Vineyards.
Yeah.
That you're staying in one place.
Wine.
a while.
Well, but
Yeah.
you're going to get your vineyards in the promised land. But here, just kind of almost, forgot the other ones, and we'll put this in now. This is a very ancient kind of a practice where you would pour out water or wine or something before the god, acknowledging that the god is the giver. So in many ways, that says God is the giver of this. They had within the Feast of Tabernacles in the fall of the year at the time of Jesus, they had a water ceremony where they would use water and pour it out on the ground and ask God to give them rain for the next year for their crops. Somebody did that too well this spring somewhere in this country. But anyway, so we have the whole thing about unintended consequences of things. The natives and the aliens all can be involved in this. And then we get this story about the fellow who's picking sticks on the Sabbath day. Let's see where we have that. These are the kind of random things. So you'll have the listing of everything, and then Moses says, after you come into the land, then present your first batch of dough. And then if you unintentionally fail to keep these, then there is a way that God will deal with you. But an individual who sins unintentionally, then they get some more of those kinds of sacrifices. But then verse 32, when the Israelites were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. Those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moses, Aaron, and the whole congregation. They put him in custody because it was not clear what should be done to him. Then the Lord said to Moses, the man shall be put to death. And all the congregation shall stone him outside the camp. The whole congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him to death, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Normally, we get the guy's name. Here we don't even get his name. Harsh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Anybody else get it this way? Well, Achan does. Who else in the New Testament?
Ananias and Sapphira.
Ananias and Sapphira. God, huh?
Stephen?
I know Stephen got stoned, but not for doing something to lie to God or to go against what God had said. He said, I mean it. Take a day off. Actually, one of our graduates at Concordia one year couldn't come to graduation because he was Jewish. He said, that's fine, I don't care. But he was Jewish. And so you don't drive on the Sabbath day. And wherever he lived, he wasn't going to walk there. He said, I love the Sabbath day. I get to play with my grandkids and have fun, and I'm not worried about that. I gotta have something to do because I know I'm not going to. Yes?
Casting lots, or God speaking directly, or we don't know?
Don't know.
The Lord said.
Yeah, this is kind of a catch-all for, we're not going to tell you. Don't know a lot of this. There is so much that, I mean, even we've got these 3 big chunks of law, and then these other ones thrown in. So it's almost more interesting to find this thing about here's this drink offering all by itself. Why is that with the rest of it? And then what do you do in some of these cases? And there are several of them along the way. Of what do you do when all of a sudden somebody goes against what is expected? So they were expected to take a day of rest. Now, maybe that's because God created the world in 6 days and said on the 7th day take a rest. Maybe it's because your servants and your slaves should not be expected to work, and thus this is a kind of a social kind of a thing. We'll see that in Deuteronomy. So the motivation for the day of rest is different in Deuteronomy than it is back in the book of Exodus. Different reasons for why these things go on. So anyway.
Where do they find the sticks? They're in the wilderness.
Good question.
Well, there were probably thorn bushes, tumbleweeds, types of things. Might not have been a big stick.
Man was delusional.
Well, the other thing is, why is he gathering sticks?
Make a fire.
To make a fire. You know, and so both of those things are. Let's just stop for just a little bit on this. Is it okay for us to do anything on the Sabbath day, or do we have to take a day of rest? And should it be Saturday or Sunday?
Yes, it's okay.
Yes, it's okay.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter what day. Okay, so I see churches that have a service on Saturday night and on Sunday. Both of them technically in the old world would have been Sunday, or Sabbath day. But what if I am a pastor and I cut the lawn on Sunday afternoon? Is that okay?
No. I'll tell you, I had an experience as a child. I always had to mow the lawn on Saturday. I didn't get it done. So I came home from church, walked home from church, started mowing. My dad took me aside and spanked me terribly because I was not supposed to be working on the Sabbath.
Now, was your dad correct?
I think so, because he was trying to teach me that remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy.
All right, but this was Sunday. Sabbath had ended.
Well, it hadn't for me,
Why not?
because Sunday was my Sabbath.
Yeah, but your dad changed the Bible then.
Maybe he did.
What I wonder is, was he bringing the fire of God on you so that it wouldn't get worse? I don't agree with what your dad did, I'm sorry. I don't think he was right in doing that.
I
Okay.
remembered it, and I always keep the Sabbath special. And
No, you don't. You keep Sunday special.
Yeah, I keep Sunday special.
Okay, so you really don't keep the Sabbath day special. That would have been Friday night at sundown till Saturday night at sundown.
Okay, I have to accept that.
Okay? Now, what I would suggest is, and because I did pastoring and teaching and translating, I just worked when I worked. I didn't go looking for, well, I have to sit and do nothing today in any way, shape, or form. But if Billy Graham goes out and does all these major events, he should stay home on Sunday and not make calls. I think what it means is don't do what you're doing the other days on the day of rest. Take a day away from what you're doing. To me, doing the lawn is not work. It's relaxation. Okay? Now, if I'm a lawn cutter, I should stay home on Sunday and not cut my own lawn. In other words, don't do what makes you money every day of the week. Don't take time off. And for me, I had to finally. You know, I would know when I'm just, you know, I got to get away from it. So if I'm a house painter, then I should take the day off. But if I'm a pastor and I get Sunday afternoon to be able to paint the garage, do it. I don't see any problem with that. See, God's not the enemy with the lightning up there anymore. He said that the law has been fulfilled in Christ. The law is really about our relationship with Him. I'm not telling Him I hate Him when I paint my garage on Sunday afternoon. It's when I got time to do it. I can't do it the other days I'm working. So,
But it has also taught me, and we don't work on Sunday, we don't
Okay.
do stuff. And I think it's offered something to our children too.
sure. We had farmers who would be afraid to go out on Sunday afternoon even though the storm was coming.
But
Okay.
that's when the ox falls in the well.
Really.
If there's an ox that falls in the well on Sunday,
That's,
then we have to do something about it, but that's an emergency.
well, okay, but then there's exceptions. Okay? It's our view of God that we're talking about here. What kind of God do we have? What kind of God do we understand? What kind of consequences do we think are going to happen for what we do?
I don't do it for that.
And that's fine. Then you have bound yourself to saying, I'm going to take a day off, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Our mom and dad never went shopping on Sunday. And my mother always wore a dress on Sunday until the very latest years when she would wear slacks to church. But it was always a special day. It was a different day. But as Kathy reminds me, that was different when I was growing up. Monday was wash day. Tuesday was ironing. Wednesday was, I don't know, Dale, do you remember? Friday was vacuuming. Thursday, I think, was
Baking. Saturday was baking.
Yeah.
Saturday was baking.
Yeah.
I don't remember that. I know Grandma used to make noodles on Saturday. But my mother saw that as her, quote, job. She was a homemaker. And that was what she did. Now, am I going to say that to my kids who are both working? That you have to sit down and do nothing for a whole day? You know, in fact, there's a lot of young people don't come to church because they say that's the day I do the laundry and catch up on the shopping. I don't think that's right, and the kids aren't skipping church. But if there's other things to do, you know, it's not that they're trying to. I think part of it is God doesn't say we have to work 7 days a week to be able to survive. He says, I'll bless you just fine what you do on 6 days. Take a day off to relax. Now, if my relaxation is, I know I have to take care of my property as well, and I paint a wall or, you know, wash the car or something like that, it's not like on purpose I go try to do that. If I can do that earlier, I can. But when I was doing the various jobs I was doing, it was, you know, a lot of Sundays I did home communions or private communions. And that was just the way I did it. And came home a lot of nights at midnight or 12:30 and was in class at 7:30 the next morning. So it was what I saw as to take care of our family. I wasn't afraid that God was going to zap me for it. My children happen to remember my name, and they even give me a hug or a kiss. And so I guess maybe that kind of worked all right, but I never worried that God was going to punish me for doing that. But I understand that there are these traditions that are not necessarily quite exactly what this is. So we have to ask always, what's the context in which these things are said? Now, what this guy is doing is he had 6 days to do it. I think he's probably a lazy bum. He didn't do it, and his wife is saying, hey, you gotta get this stuff going finally.
Hey, you just say the wife.
This comes from a woman who does not have a honey-do list, and never has. So I've never had to worry about that. I've never had to worry about what she was going to tell me to do, or that I couldn't do anything because she had something else in mind. So we have had just a fine time of it. But there are some, as you might know, Mrs. Trapp, who do say such things to their spouses. And so for them, anyway, so here's where we are. Gotta get in trouble every single time I come here. Now I have to drive home and I get in more trouble. As we go on with some more of this griping and complaining, we have, first of all, Korah from the tribe of Levi. Why would the Levites not like Moses' leadership?
Well, because they're the priests, the priests.
Well, the Levites, the high priests are Aaron's family, but the Levites are the ones complaining here.
They don't get land? Is that it?
No. Who does Moses think he is? You know, there's a lot of us in our family who would do a better job of leading than that guy. See, these things are spilling out of, we're not going up in the land. So this 38 years is going to eat away at them, just over and over and over again. They're going to be eating away at that. But then Dathan and Abiram from the tribe of Reuben, why would they have a gripe? Because they're the firstborn tribe. We should be the ones who are in charge. Okay, so, 250 other leaders come in, and these are all complicated about how do these things work together. But anyway, you're not more holy than the rest of them, it says, and Reuben won't even show up. Korah at least appears. And what happens to him? The ground breaks open and swallows him up. Sort of like Jabba the Hutt. You know, when Luke Skywalker is in this hovercraft, and they're just barely saving him, and he was going to be swallowed down by what looks like a mixer, you know, that's going to swallow him down, and he gets saved from that. The ground opens up, and then it closes up again. And they're just plain gone. This is not nice stuff here. You know, if you hear people say, well, I never read the Old Testament, it scares me. Well, I understand that. Because God says I'm not to be toyed with. I chose Moses. I chose to give you manna. Get over it. And yes, but. And it's all the yes, but in our old sinful nature that makes all of these things come along. So anyway, the bronze censers are reused then, and there's a plague that finally stops, and many other people die. Chapter 17, here's the complaint about Aaron. The other tribes, they all come together and they say, we don't like that this guy Aaron from the tribe of Levi is the important one. We think all of us. So they didn't learn from Reuben and his family dying. They said, we all think that we ought to have just as an important kind of a thing. And so the rod of Aaron then is brought into the tabernacle, and the walking sticks from the other guys as well. And next morning, even though this is a dead stick, it produces ripe almonds. Whatever happened to that stick? Come on, you Sunday school people. Come on, you Sunday school people. Got put in the covenant box, along with a jar of manna and the 10 words. Aaron's staff that budded, which says, God says, I chose this guy, leave it alone. So, do I dare? I'm going to say it and it go right on. We have a president, go on. See, we don't have it in our country either. We're going to continue to wish it was somewhere else. And our politics, no matter Democrat or Republican, it's always we wish the other guy had won. It's just always that way. I read this big, long David McCullough book about Harry Truman. My goodness, poor Harry was given grief. You get through the Second World War, and then everybody and his uncle says, we've been denying ourselves so long, now we want everything. And he tries some stuff that doesn't work and some stuff that does work. And he was already proposing health care for everybody way back in the 1940s. Universal health care. That's nothing brand new. Been talking about it forever. And they were sure he wasn't going to get reelected because nobody thought much of high-tax Harry. And he went on a barnstorming tour, went throughout the country, went all the way out to California by train, and came back and all these whistle-stop things. And you know that newspaper article, the Chicago Trib, that says Dewey won, or Dewey wins. And so Harry was invited to a dinner about eating crow. They were all going to eat crow. He says, I'm not coming to your dinner. They were all going to, they were actually said, if Harry wins, we'll eat crow. And they actually had this dinner in Washington, all the reporters, and they were going to eat crow. Harry said, I'm not going to your dinner. But, you know, the trouble is always there. It's never the right king, it's never the right governor, it's never the right senator, it's never the right congressman, it's never the right, you know, ombudsman, no matter what it is. Never the right pastor, never the right teacher, you know, never the right policeman. There's always going to be something. Because human beings basically will export their own frustrations and blame somebody else. Nothing new here, but instead of just looking at it, look at the heart that is in all of us. And at least say, there's no surprise when I find myself thinking that way. But the result of it is God says, yes, but I'm with you, and I haven't left you. And we have to learn that lesson over and over every day. I had a Scripture and Life Bible study one year that the title of it was Same Old Story, So What's New? It's the same old story, week after week. What's new is my week. My week is different every week. There are different things that we face, different things that we struggle with. So these people, they had all of their struggles, they had all of their problems. They saw the manna coming down and they didn't like it. They worry about the water and everything like that. So they're afraid everybody's going to die, and God says, no, that won't happen. So chapter 18, Aaron's family is in charge. And here we get this idea. Chapter 18 is really kind of about let Aaron's family be the leaders in the worship and get off their case. Don't be bothering them all the time to have something happen differently. But it's their dream of going in the land, which God had promised, and they turned away, and the consequences that are going to be from that. So the Levites are going to get tithes. And see, until you have the Levites, you don't need tithes. I don't know if you ever thought of that. So the tithe is for the person who is serving God on your behalf. So if they didn't have a high priest, they wouldn't need any tithe. Where's the first tithe in the Bible? Not a trick question, Mrs. Trapp. Abraham with Melchizedek in Genesis 15, where he offers to someone who is serving God as priest and king. And we have a couple of references to it here and there. But the tithe really is to say, you are doing important things for us before God and from God to us. And we pull you away from the occupation you would have had otherwise or could have had to do this on our behalf to bring us good news. That's why we provide for our pastor. Okay, we say you could have gone out and made a lot more money doing something else. My friend Bill Behringer, he was our mailman. His dad was the Nazarene pastor in the next town over. He says, the people of the congregation, Bill says to his dad, we'll keep you poor and God will keep you humble. And Randy Sharon talked one time about this congregation that said, oh, Pastor, we can't give you a raise. We didn't have a very good year in the crops this year. They just weren't very good every year. Finally, they get this bumper crop like they've never had before. And then they say, oh, Pastor, you don't think we want to tempt God twice, do you? So then you find out what's really in the heart way down deep. The tithe, so 1% of all the tithe was actually to go to the family of Aaron. So they are serving and they are to be getting that. Then we have these ashes for the red heifer, and we've talked about that a little bit with that woman who if she is suspected of having cheated on her husband. Well, there's other ways of purifying anyone who touched the dead as well. And on the third and the seventh day, that's maybe at play. I can't tell for sure, but when the priest goes by in the Good Samaritan story and goes by on the other side, maybe he just didn't want to have to be off work for a week. And if the guy had died, then he would be bound to not do any work. Now, if you're the kind of guy who is a priest who doesn't like to work, you'd be around looking for all the dead. I'll bury this one and that's it for the week. Of course, and they used to say this at St. Stephen in Detroit, why should the pastor get a raise? He only works 1 hour a week anyway. Keep it going. Keep it going, Uncle August. So anyway, chapter 20. Now the Israelites are at Kadesh Barnea. Time has passed along the way, and that is where Miriam died and is buried. Kadesh, the word kadosh, is the word for holy. Do any of you know the word kiddush for the kiddush cup in the Passover, the Passover meal? They call the kiddush cup the cup of blessing, which we bless. So kadosh. So here Kadesh, and there will be another Kadesh that is in the book of end of the book of Joshua, or beginning of the beginning of the book of Judges, with the Song of Deborah, where Yael is from a family connected with Moses, and a brother-in-law or some relative who did go up into the land, and when the Syrians are fighting against the Israelites, Jabin and Sisera flee, and Sisera flees to this woman's house, and she offers him, I always like to say milk and cookies. She offers him warm milk and some bread, and then hides him as he is fleeing. But Sisera had not taken his world religions course before that time and didn't realize that Yael and her family were connected with Moses' family. And so she had a higher allegiance to them, and so she put a tent peg through his head and killed him. So God works sometimes through plagues and fire. Sometimes he works through people who he does things to help deliver his people. If we are going to play by the rules of today and our morality, then the Christian church ought to close shop. Because this is, there are people who look in the Bible and say, if that's the way you are, you're the narrow, conservative minded people that we want nothing to do with. And that's why the Christian church does not look very good today. Because all of this stuff, not only just from God, but just all the things where somebody has said, either I would like to represent God, or I'm going to represent God even wrongly and do my own thing. There are all sorts of ways in which people, in the name of God, in every religion, have gone after others, and many times it's not a religious war, it's a war among people who happen to have different religious connections. God doesn't say go and steal some from everybody else. What I've given you, I've given you. Chapter 20, then this is the one some of you even mentioned to me. Why did God say you struck the rock instead of just talking to it, and therefore you can't go in the land of promise? I personally think, even though that's there, that God finally just said, you're not going to go in the land, somebody else is going to go into the land. You've got your 120 years. That's as much time as I've given anybody. And we get that all the way back in the flood story. And Moses, you've done your job. You've led the people this far. But this says, well, he struck the rock, and God said, well, you're angry, so I'm not going to let you go in the land. You can go look at it. So live with it as we will. Aaron dies at Mount Hor and is buried, and Eleazar takes over from him. Chapter 21. Do you remember that city I talked about with Kathy? Hormah, from the word Cherem, from the ban. Now, at the very place where they had been defeated 38 years earlier. See, all in this little time, all of a sudden 38 years passed. And we hear only 3 little snippets of something that happens along the way here, of a little bit of grumbling and griping, and some people who had consequences. A lot of the days we just don't have anything. But now they go back to Hormah, and again, at least if Tel Masos was Horma, we didn't find any destruction layer, any burn layer, or anything there. But there is where they begin the victory, and they defeat the king of Arad. And Arad would have been about, Beersheba about 6-7 kilometers to the west, and Arad 6-7 kilometers to the east. Those were the two major worship sites in the very southern part of the country, and that's where you'd find wells. When Kathy and I were there, I think in 1990, there was a Jewish man paying to excavate the well of Arad, and they were down 75 feet and hadn't gotten to the bottom yet. So what you would do is you would put wells, you would dig, and it might be maybe a little bit longer than the table. Not much, but maybe a little longer than the table. And you would dig down, and then you'd put stones in. So you'd build the wall from the top down. And you're pounding the stones in, and then you're plastering it and getting it all to hold. And then when it rained, the water would come down the wadi beds and go in there. And the dust and dirt would settle. That was where they got their water from, in areas where they could not find a well. So they would save the water, and that water would last them for the whole year. They would water their animals with that, and some of their crops and everything, but they were down 75 feet. And so these are what there's a different word we use for a dry well. It's not an artesian well where the water bubbles up from underneath the ground. Some of those, they have some where the water bubbles up, some where they did dig down far enough to be able to reach the water table and were able to climb down and get water. So in cities like Megiddo and Hatzor, I've actually walked on. I don't think you came down all the way with me, did you? But went down to where the water was down below in Jerusalem. It's kind of like that, not quite. But if you want to know where somebody's going to live, find a hill and water. And they build their wall around the top, and they have a water source from inside, and they have a pit inside there somewhere with their grain, and if someone comes to attack, they all go flee behind the city wall. A lot of other places are just villages. But city walls were built because people wanted to steal what you had. So, if there was no robbery, there would have been no city walls at all. So anyway, first of all, they go into Arad, which is the south central part, and I know I don't have the map up. You'll just have to look in the back of your Bible to see where this is. But Beersheba is the southern end. Below that is called the Arabah, which is kind of like the desert area. And you go quite a ways down to get to Kadesh, Kadesh Barnea. So what they did then was, first of all, they go to defeat him there. It's almost kind of like just closing the other bookend. But then they go around the Dead Sea to the south, and for you it would be going around the Dead Sea to the south. They're going to go through the land of Edom. They're going to eventually get into the plains of Moab, where the whole next book takes place. So Deuteronomy is basically one speech of one day, of summarizing everything. So it's not like we have, each chapter is a certain number of years. We've got little vignettes here and there, and long places here where you have virtually nothing. But then they're going to go through, and they go around Edom, and the Edomites don't want to let them go through, even though they said, we'll stay on the main road, we won't take anything. They didn't let them, so they went even farther around. There was a King's Highway they used to go down through Edom, and that would have been the one down by Sodom and Gomorrah. But then they go up over even further, and the people are complaining once again. This is our last complaint, at least for this cycle, and they're complaining. And if you go to a very expensive theater, what does the curtain do? It hangs on the ground. About a foot of it is on the ground, right? They drop it down and it's on the ground. So the kind most of us are used to, you got the little string at the end and it pulls this way, but the real big ones, they go up this way and they drop down, so that if you're sitting there, you don't see someone's feet moving around while they're taking their places. Well, in essence, what God said is, I have dropped a curtain all the way around you, all the way through the wilderness. Every once in a while, lifts it up a little bit, fire comes sneaking in, the snakes come sneaking in. He says, you realize what could have been happening if I wasn't protecting you? You start grumping, I'll show you what happens. I'll either bomb you with 5 billion birds, or I'll let the snakes come in. And so Moses then builds this serpent, which they put on a cross-type thing, and it says if they looked to that, then they would be healed. So these fiery serpents, and we haven't seen the serpents out in the desert, we've seen scorpions. And the one kid who didn't wear his shoes wore them the next day. Poor kid. But you know, there are all sorts of dangers in all sorts of places. And so God says, I've been protecting you. You have no idea all the ways I've protected you that you don't even know about. And so we're, you know, say, I wish I had more. God says, oh, there's a whole bunch of stuff I've been doing for you that you don't even know about. But anyway, they go up farther than after this. And first of all, there is this song at the well, and then they defeat Sihon of the Ammonites, which would be more up around where the other side of the Sea of Galilee is, and Og, king of Bashan. And that's nice high country that in Amos it talks about the cows of Bashan. And when Kathy and I were there, I think it must have been in 1984, we were on a bus tour looking at various archaeological sites and part of the Congress that we went to. And literally, the cows were in grass this tall in the spring. And so Amos uses that, and he says, you cows of Bashan, about the women in Jerusalem, who are in Bethel, who he says, you have to have the best of everything at someone else's expense. So anyway, now we get the beginning of the conquering of the land to the east of the Jordan. So I'm going to just go through much more quickly now these last chapters and get us caught up through the end. So they are in the plains of Moab. Chapters 22, 23, and 24 are one of the weirdest kind of episodes because this is all about Balaam the prophet. He's a prophet from up in Syria, and he gets summoned. So he must have been known for some sort of powers. We don't deny that there are powers at work on this earth, just that we are not to be praying to them or trying to find allegiance with them. But because of what happened with Og and Sihon, this king Balak in the country of Moab, he hires this guy and he says, would you please come and curse the Israelites for me? And at first, God says to him, don't go. And then later God says, okay, go, but only say the blessing. So we've got this thing with the donkey talking. The snakes talks in Genesis, the donkey talks here, and the only other animals you will ever hear talking are on reruns of Johnny Carson. A lot of animals talk nowadays on Johnny's show, but other than that, see, now most of my students, that's why I had to quit, retire. They didn't know who Johnny Carson was, you know. And I would tell them that. I'd say, you know, you don't know my stories anymore. I don't have any new ones. But Balaam finally has to recognize he is only going to say what God lets him say, and he will do nothing but bless them. And so chapter 23, Balaam says, well, let's build 7 altars. And you can almost see Balak being led around by the nose. Well, let's try this. Balaam knows it's not going to work. But he says, well, at least humor the guy and let him think I'm trying something. I cannot curse those whom God blesses. Those who bless you, I'll bless. Those who curse you, I will curse. Oddly enough, phrases that are strange. Here it says, God is king in Israel. You don't have that anywhere else around. God was not known as king, he was known as God. But here with Balaam talking, that's the terminology he's going to use for who is in charge. And at the third site, finally, at Peor, Balaam blesses the people. And let's read that together, the blessing of the last one I'd like to at least have here. So, chapter 24. The oracle of Balaam, son of Beor, the oracle of the man whose eye is clear, the oracle of one who hears the words of God, who sees the vision of the Almighty, which is here El Shaddai, or here Shaddai, which we've heard a couple times before, who falls down but with eyes uncovered. How fair are your tents, O Jacob, your encampments, O Israel, like palm groves that stretch far away, like gardens beside a river, like aloes that the Lord has planted, like cedar trees beside the waters. Water shall flow from his buckets, and his seed shall have abundant water. His king shall be higher than Agag, and now we have another king mentioned. Who was Agag? He's the king of the Amalekites, where they had that battle, and later others are going. Agag may be like a word pharaoh, like a title. His kingdom shall be exalted. God who brings him out of Egypt is like the horns of a wild ox for him. He shall devour the nations that are his foes and break their bones. He shall strike with his arrows. He crouched, he lay down like a lion, like a lioness who will rouse him up. Blessed is everyone who blesses you, and cursed is everyone who curses you. Then Balak's anger was kindled against Balaam. So then he uttered this next oracle. The oracle of Balaam, son of Beor, the oracle of a man whose eye is clear. Verse 16, the oracle of one who hears the words of Almighty, of God, who knows the knowledge of the Most High. That's El Elyon there. Who sees the vision of the Almighty. So some rather not normal used words that are in here. Who falls down but with eyes uncovered. I see him but not now. I behold him but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. It shall crush the borderlands of Moab and the territory of all the Shethites. Edom will be become a possession, Seir a possession of its enemies, while Israel does valiantly. One out of Jacob shall rule and destroy the survivors of Ir. Then he looked on Amalek and uttered this his oracle, saying, First among the nations was Amalek, but its end is to perish forever. Then he looked on the Kenite and uttered his oracle, saying, Enduring is your dwelling place, and your nest is set in the rock. Yet Cain is destined for burning. How long shall Ashur take you away captive? And again he uttered his oracle, saying, Alas, who shall live when God does this? But ships shall come from Kittim, that's actually in Cyprus, out in the Mediterranean, and shall afflict Ashur and Eber, and he also shall perish forever. Then Balaam got up and went back to his home, and Balak also went his way. Question is, did he ever get paid? My guess is probably not. Had to write that off at his 1040. So chapter 25, another one of these things. Some of the Israelites are having sex with the Moabite women. Again, you are denying God. By worshiping or marrying women, you are going to be worshiping the same gods that they worship. And so that point at which you step over the bounds, when I taught the women's prison at Oak Park Heights, I don't know if I told you this, but one day, have I talked about Oak Park Heights in this class yet? Or I'm sorry, at Shakopee. One day, I'm teaching ethics, and the women all came in very angry. I said, what in the world are you angry about? And it was the day we talked about why you put people in prison. And why do you put people in prison? There's 4 reasons, at least that they gave in the book. Number 1, punish them. Number 2, get them off the street. Number 3, rehab them. And number 4?
Deterrent.
No? Well, yeah, a deterrent. To teach other people a lesson. We're using them, so we throw the book at them so somebody else will say, I don't want to go to prison. And I don't know if I've ever told you this, Dale, but one of the students looked just like Nancy. And I finally said to her, I know I'm not supposed to ask why you're in here, but why are you in here? and she said, I'm the poster girl for fraud. So she had done something at work, and instead of getting 1.5 years, she got 7 years. And so, sometimes I kind of think this may be what's going on. God says, I don't want anybody overstepping the bounds. You're going to see what the real consequences are. So stay away from that. It's just not healthy for you. It's not as much that he's just plain angry as that he says, this leads you to destruction. I don't want you to be lost. But sometimes the methods are way beyond what we would like to see. But anyway, the Midianite woman and the Israelite man pierced through by Phinehas, and then many others who had gone away. 24,000 of them died. 24 whole groups of them. But it says that Eleazar finally turned back the wrath of God against these people, and then there was a covenant of peace. Now, because it's called Numbers, we have some more numbers. There's just a little bit less than the 600,000 or so that we have at the beginning of the Exodus time period, and the land is to be apportioned then according to the tribes, and the Levitic clans, of course, are not going to have their special territory. They will live in 48 cities kind of scattered within, and as I mentioned last time, they're going to be kind of involved a little bit in making sure that the laws of God are implemented. The daughters of
600,000, just the men?
just the men above 20. Yeah, and that's caused all sorts of trouble for people. How can you have 2 million people out there? And there's all sorts of suggestions that they gave, but whoever it was, God brought people out. And however that works. Others say the word thousand, it may be a family group. But you can spin yourself silly trying to figure out all of how you can fit everybody in to those areas and the territory there. What happens if somebody only has daughters and no sons? Then their name perishes. But they didn't want to have any of the family groups perish, so something interesting happened. And Kathy, I don't think you've heard me say this one before, though I've said it many, many times. So in Kathy's family, there are 4 daughters, Phyllis and Grace and Nancy and Kathy. There were no sons. Kathy's mom was RH negative and probably had some miscarriages because of an RH factor. And so she has 4, there are 4 siblings, so the Holzel name disappears, at least from Ted Holzel's family line. The alternative would have been that when we got married, since you can change your name, I would have become Thomas Holzel. And then I would have become part of the Holzel family and not been part of the Trapp family. And since I'm a younger Trapp, I probably wouldn't have gotten any land. Dale would have never given me a square inch. He's eager to keep it all for himself. But that's the way this works, and they'll have even a couple more things to keep a family line going and to keep it within a particular tribe. So Moses gets to see the promised land. You'd think he's about ready to die, but he's got a whole book yet to read out loud to them. So Joshua is appointed the new leader. Then chapter 28, we have certain things about various kinds of offerings and various celebration days. We've looked at these before. This is kind of an instant replay again, so we keep getting these updated summaries. The most common day would have been the Sabbath. Every 7th day, the new moon, 1 day or 2 days, sometimes they would celebrate that. Passover in the fall of the year, first fruits in the fall of the year. The various offerings then, Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year, New Year's Day. Rosh is the word for head, and Hashanah, Shana is the word for a year. The H-A is the word for the, so the head of the year. The Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, the word Yom is the word for day. Kafar or Kippur, which is also the name of the covering in the Ark of the Covenant, the Kipporet, is very enough similar that if you heard the word kippar and cover, you're talking the same thing. So it's covering over the sins of the people. Of course, they'd also send that animal out into the wilderness, but God simply says, I don't look at what's gone wrong. That's all gone and that's taken away. Then the festival of ingathering of the fruits, which would be in the fall of the year, and then they would have, some days would be solemn assemblies. And then you've got the votive offerings, free will, burnt grain, drink offerings. Then a vow. If a man makes a vow, it lasts. If a woman makes a vow and her father agrees, then it's okay. If a married woman makes a vow and her husband agrees, it's okay. If a divorced or widowed woman makes a vow, it's binding. Now, I like to tell little stories along the way. When Dale and I were growing up, there was a salesman who came through the neighborhood. Do you know what I'm going to mention? Do you know this? Selling something called the Book House Books by Olive Beaupre Miller, I think was her name, and a lot of little stories, little poems. The clock struck 1, the mouse ran down type of things. Do you remember the Blue Book House books that I happen to have those? I stole them before.
I like the back.
Huh? You what?
I need to borrow them.
Yeah, okay. My favorite in there was Teeny Tiny. And if you don't know Teeny Tiny, you'll just have to look it up. But anyway, Mom agreed to buy this set. And I think it was $75 for 12 books. Them be lots of money back in 1949 or 50. Mom read those to us a lot. But Dad did not say, "You're wrong." I don't know if they paid $5 a month or something for 30 years or whatever it would have been. And they were, I don't think we ever got all the way toward maybe past volume 4 or 5. But a lot of the reading that we heard when we were kids was from the Bookhouse books, and they were just very nice stories. Some of them that you can't have in books anymore. That used to be popular, and society has changed a little bit along the way. But that would have been the kind of thing where if Dad would have come home and said, "No, we can't afford it," then they would have said, "Okay, then that's void." Today, usually when you sign a contract, you have like 72 hours or something where you can void a contract, and they build that in at least on a lot of them. But it would have been different depending on whether it was a young girl who may have been just impetuous and said she wanted to do something, or even a wife. The husband was the head of the household, but the wife becomes the head of the household, notice, when he dies, which is very different from what we normally think about, where the oldest son takes over as head of the household. So we have some odd kinds of things that don't all quite fit in here. Chapter 31, there's battles against the Midianites, and even poor Balaam gets caught up in it and gets killed. He should have stayed home. And they take the women and children as booty. Again, this is the kind of stuff. The men are killed, the women and children are taken over and become part of the people. The only women who could live were the virgins who had not had sex and probably offered themselves to that particular god who was worshipped in the area. And so they were taken by the Israelite men and took into the families. And so the soldiers had to be purified after the battles. This is a question about what kind of wars you go into, and then they would divide the booty or the spoils. Chapter 32, since Reuben and Gad have cattle, they say, "We'd like to stay on the east. How about if we stay here?" And Moses says, "If you go over the west and help them win that land, then you can come back here. That'll be just fine." Then half the tribe of Manasseh, particularly under the family of Machir, comes and joins them there, and they settle in Gilead on the east side. Then there's a list of all the staging places along the way that Aaron died at 123, which is why we know he was 3 years older. And in the plains of Moab, which would now be western Jordan, the country of Jordan. It would be the western part of Jordan is where the Moabites would have lived. Remember who Moab is? Moab and Ammon? Lot's two daughters. And we don't even know their names, but one is the Ben Ammon, or the sons of the Ammonite, or the Ammonites, and the other the Moabites. So those are kind of distant relatives. But again, it's the Canaanite idols that are really kind of a subtext along the way. Chapter 34, they define the promised land and what the other 9.5 tribes are going to get. And Eleazar and Joshua are to cross the Jordan and work with them. Chapter 35, it says the Lord talks to Moses about how the Levites will get cities, but 6 of them are to be called cities of refuge. So if someone accidentally hurt somebody, so the example is they were in the forest and they were chopping down trees and the axe handle flew off and hit the other guy in the head and he died. Negligent homicide or an accident is different than first-degree murder. And so the hard thing is, if you were the cause of someone's death, you'd have to go live in one of the cities of refuge until the high priest died. And I've been wondering for years and years and years and years and years, why in the world did that make any difference? And an old idea from Kyle and Delitzsch from 1881 commentary, Kyle says it's because the high priest bears all the sins of the people, and when he dies, then the sin is gone. That's the only thing I've ever seen on this. So I'll go with it until I can find something better, at least as a possible theory. Then If there is a murder, you have to have witnesses, and that shows up later. And then finally, the last chapter, Zelophehad's daughters only keep the land if they marry within their own clan, so they have to keep close close in their family, so probably what we would call cousins, and second cousins, something like that. And says, these are the commandments and the ordinances from Moses to Israel in the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho. And you would have thought the next thing ought to be they go over into the land. But now we have to have another whole 2 Wednesdays to look at 34 more chapters. And one thing that you will notice is some of these are updated in terms of laws that would be appropriate to land that would not be appropriate to desert. And some of them will be more sociologically oriented, about worrying about how you take care of your slaves or your workers and things like that. So anyway, we will see you next week, and I know we went over a little bit. We will start next week with Deuteronomy, and I'm back on track. So thank you all very much.